Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Papaya wash processed Ecuador from Resident Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Resident, based out of Gainesville, Florida. And this is their second ever appearance on this channel, having recently reviewed the Tito Community, a different wash processed Ecuadorian coffee. But this one right here was the main reason for purchase from Resident in the first place, as this is yet another Juan Peña Mejorado coffee. And given that I've really enjoyed them from a number of different coffee roasters this year, it felt like a great opportunity to try one out from a coffee roaster that I didn't have any familiarity with before this review. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 41. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind roast profile for this coffee. So as we mentioned in our previous Resident review, that one was a little bit more developed than this one right here, as this one didn't feel quite as far along on the spectrum as that one did. Even then, I feel like most people would align this one as being on the more developed side of that light medium, as it's still kind of pushing the boundary for being just slightly more developed than we're used to reviewing. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and there was a notable bit of citrus at the forefront, as the cup offered plenty of the listed lime-like aspect within this one. In addition to that, there's a notable bit of tea-like savoriness, but the cup focuses on a high level of sweetness, which is something that I was definitely expecting and hoping for from this coffee. So as a result, given the contrast to the other Ecuadorian coffee we had from Resident, I liked this one significantly more than that one, and felt like there was much greater potential with this coffee. We move on to day 17, as we opted for the Chemex, and there was more of the Mejorado like brown candy sweetness through this brew method, and that's definitely what I was hoping for from this coffee, even with that first impression, because when it comes to these Mejorado coffees, I continue to always hope for really high levels of sweetness with that very unique Mejorado like aspect to them. There is a slight bit of the smokiness, as it does feel a little bit more developed than once again I was expecting for these coffees going into them. More of the savoriness and citric components are also present, but it does seem to kind of bypass all of those things by offering a very high level of sweetness. Continue on to day 20, as we opted for the April brewer, and there were plenty more of the citric aspects on the forefront and on the back end, with some savory tea-like aspects, but a bit of the brown candy sweetness continues to remain present in the finish, which does tie this coffee all together. There is a little bit less of the development feel within the finish on this day, as I'm getting a little bit more of the fruit depth in terms of a slight stone fruit-like aspect. So it did appear like the coffee might have been improving with time, either that or just benefited from a flat bottom brewer. We continue on to day 25, as we opted for the V60 with lower temperatures, and it did help this one right off brew, as it offered plenty of the brown candy sweeter aspects to it, with some subtle citric as well as peachy qualities. As the cup cooled down though, it didn't necessarily yield the best results, as I was feeling a fair bit of the smokiness, plenty of the savoriness as well. So I felt like this might need some adjusting, and we'll go back to our standard recipe once again, because the trade-off just seemed to be that I will take the smoky qualities with the more pronounced and stronger qualities of the rest of the coffee as that trade-off. Day 28 opted for the Chemex with lower temperatures, and the cup felt more toned down than some of the earlier days, with the citric quality continuing to remain the most pronounced. And the lime note that they do have listed on here, it's kind of fun for me, because that always seems to be there, and it's not something I was necessarily expecting from this coffee, especially given the overall development of it, but that lime was just always there. It was always present, and I'm like, wow, this coffee is just so much more lively than that Tito Community coffee, and it was an interesting contrast between these two Ecuadorian coffees that I was drinking side by side, essentially. Defined herbality continues to remain in line with the listed tea note. Subtlety to the stone fruits, but they were also notable as well to make a mark on this note. Day 31 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and I've mentioned already the trade-offs, as the sweetness in the cup as well as the intensity of the citrus continue to dominate it, and it's definitely worth the trade-off of the roasty qualities for me anyway. Forefront a bit more complex, as there's some peachiness to it, and these notes are going to be pretty consistent, mostly because I do have to say that oftentimes when it comes to slightly more developed coffees, I feel like there's just consistency to them more often. and that seems to be the case with this coffee as well. Day 34 opted for the Chemex with our standard recipe, and that strong citric aspect, it continues to be the first note that I discuss when it comes to these coffees, because it just seems to be very well defined within this one. I continue to harp on just how structured that lime-like aspect is within it. Still high on the candied sweetness with a slight peachiness, but it continues to be hindered ever so slightly by the roasty quality of this one. Day 37 final notes we have through the V60 and continues to remain consistent. I'm going to continue to go back to that citric note, as first thing you experience from this coffee on that first sip is that very notable lime-like aspect of it. It does range from a slight peachiness, some slight red berries, a brown candied aspect, and plenty of tea-like savoriness as well. So this coffee does have a nice bit of depth to it. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have a few level 4s, so let's go through those. And this time I'll actually start with the cleanliness, because I feel like that's very important to discuss. So the cleanliness is at a level 4, and we will take a look at the smokiness, which is at a level 2, because I've already mentioned that there is a bit of a roasty quality in this one. And I've said that oftentimes the reason we would downgrade the cleanliness for a wash processed coffee is if it's hindered by smokiness. I do have to say, there's enough in the rest of this coffee, at least as far as definition and clarity goes, that it may be on the lower side of level 4, but I don't think it was hindered enough by the development of this one to kind of take away from that level 4. So for that reason, it is at the level 4, if maybe on the slightly lower side of that level 4. Finish, level 4 as well. And this one, as mentioned, it does kind of taper off into that specific kind of smoky, roasty quality that is present within this. Outside of that, though, there are nice components to it as well. The sugary sweetness, that brown candy sweetness, as well as even a slight peachy quality to it. So I actually don't mind the finish. The trade-off is worth it for me. Sweetness, level 4. These Mejorado coffees tend to be very sweet. And maybe I should actually put a little bit of an asterisk there, or a caveat there, because this one just says Tipica, and I did reach out to Resident, and they said that it should all be a Tipica, but then I also reached out to Juan Peña, and he said that all of the coffees that he's exported have also been Mejorados. He doesn't exported any Tipica, so I'm not entirely sure. I do believe that this is a Mejorado coffee, and if it's not, then it still offered the Mejorado-like aspects in terms of the sweetness. So that's a level 4 for me, regardless of how this coffee is, and it could also be the priming effect, but I do think that this one offered enough sweetness to justify that mark. Plurality, level 4, and that was definitely much more in that floral herbal side of things, definitely thinking much more in line with the hibiscus-like component. That was quite pronounced for me, enough to the point where it did reach level 4, one of the few other level 4s in this tasting wheel. Citrus fruit, level 4, the lime-like aspect right there at the forefront, and I'm glad that they have it as one of the first notes listed on here, because you're just experiencing that right at this very start, and it's the most consistent, prominent, and pronounced note in a consistent and prominent pronounced coffee. A handful of level 3s, so we will start with the acidity level 3. Toned down. I think after the first try it had of the Cheeto Community Coffee, I probably could have expected, if this is in fact a Mejorado coffee with the development, that we probably weren't going to be experiencing too much brightness from it. Level 3 does seem like the perfect place to put it. Berry fruit, level 3. And given that this coffee did have a slight red theme to it, then I think that they may have a lychee note listed on here, and that would make a lot of sense. I'm getting some softer red berry aspects within this one, hidden underneath the other much more dominant components, sugariness, citrus, as well as that smoky quality. Stone fruit, level 3. Mentioned a softer, kind of subtle stone fruit aspect. I think that they might have a nectarine note listed on here. I see it as a little bit more of a fresh fruit, so nectarine or peach, both works really well for me in the softer sense once again. Caramel level 3, it does have that brown candy-like aspect to it, regardless of what the actual varietal of this coffee is. But I could see it from both ways, given the development of this coffee in general. So level 3 does feel like a really good place to put that. Savoriness level 3, I don't know if it's just because of the coffees that we picked out from Resident, or if that tends to be a direction that they go in general, but this is yet another savory black tea-like component that's present within this coffee. So that also scored there at that level 3 mark. And then the only other thing really worth discussing in this tasting wheel is the body at a level 2. As I've also mentioned in the past, Mejorado doesn't necessarily offer the most body. Again, if it's a Tipica, then I mean, it just is what it is, that it's on the lower body side of things, but it's at the level 2, not necessarily to the same extent as the Cheeto Community Coffee. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. As mentioned, I enjoyed this one much more than the Cheeto Community Coffee. This is one of those coffees where I said, Okay, it's a little bit more developed than I would like, but I'm able to find a lot of the aspects from this one that I do enjoy in general. As I've said in the past, just because a coffee might be a slight bit more developed than my own preferences, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't find things that I do enjoy about this coffee. And there was plenty to enjoy about this one, especially in terms of the sweetness and the fruit as well as floral depth to this one. It offered enough of both of those where I said, okay, I'll live with something, the smokiness that I don't necessarily like in this coffee, mostly because the trade-off and the rest of it is worth it. So for that reason, I thought that this one was nice. I liked it definitely a lot more than that Chicho Community coffee. I still wish maybe it wasn't quite as developed as it was, because I did enjoy the other Juan Peña coffees, the washed Mejorados I have had this year, than this one. But even then, I think it just gives me a good idea of this coffee as well as this coffee roaster. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I feel like it's an interesting place because at some regard, it's offering a bit of traditionality with the development, the profile of this coffee. While at the same time, this is a very modern coffee. It's offering so many of the modern aspects, especially in terms of the sweetness, the florality, as well as the fruit depth to it. So kind of the combination of the two, I feel like if you do like your sweeter, more fruity and floral coffees, but you've also wanted just a little bit more of the old school traditional feel to it, then this kind of combines the two of those in a unique way, as I don't think I've had a coffee that really does that from many or any coffee roasters. So that in itself provides something unique and different, and it's the best direction I can point somebody towards for this one, and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the La Papaya, wash processed Ecuador from Resident Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.